All right, everybody, welcome back to another video here. We are not playing Magic Online today. It's going to be a tournament recap instead. I had the pleasure of playing in a Legacy 5K on the weekend, just yesterday actually, at which I played Turbo Doomsday. The tournament did not go as well as I would have liked it to go. I ended up finishing 3-3 at the end of the tournament. I dropped the last round just to kind of get out of there a bit earlier. But in any case, I thought I would share my experience because the tournament ended up starting out pretty nicely for me. And then the wheels kind of fell off in the last couple of rounds. But it began as a possibly promising tournament, but ended with a literally middling result. This tournament was hosted by Legacy of the North, which is a really good Legacy community in the Southern Ontario area where I'm from. They do a really great job putting on many paper Legacy events. There's a lot of great players that come out. Everybody's really, really nice, awesome. It's always a great time to play at their tournaments. And it was also held at Enter the Battlefield, which is another great store. I'm not sponsored or anything like this by any of these two entities, but I just thought that I would point it out to you in case you are in that area, or even some of these events like these 5Ks are actually worth traveling to. So I hope that they continue doing this because it's really awesome. It's great to see paper Magic. I prefer to play paper Magic. Sometimes staring at these Magic Online screens is just it's just too much for me. But in any case, I thought I'd show you the deck that I decided to register at the event, and then give just a quick rundown of the 6 rounds that I played, and maybe we can reflect on some things that I learned along the way. Okay. So without further ado, let's start with the deck list. I think I've got this like weird lighting set up here. I'm hoping the audio is sounding all right and that you can see the cards clearly. I'll run through the cards. I don't have enough room on my playmat and then me here in the corner in order to like lay out the deck fully for you to see, but we'll lay out the most important parts and then kind of talk about where we're at with the list. So we'll start with the mana base here. We're running 4 Polluted Deltas. It's part of the Fetch Land suite. We've got a Verdant Catacombs, a Scalding Tarn, a Misty Rainforest, and a Flooded Strand. So I chose only to play 8 fetches, not 9 at this event. I did the classic max out on Polluted Deltas so that you can get Basic Island and Basic Swamp with those, and then get yourself 3 more blue fetches and 1 black fetch to have a 5th fetch that can get the Swamp in cases where you might need that. That obviously runs the risk of drawing the Verdant Catacombs when you need the Basic Island instead, but I do tend to like this kind of 8 fetch land breakdown when I'm playing myself. And so that is what I decided to go with. I like having that fifth land, or that 5th black fetching land. That's what I did at Eternal Weekend, and that's what I did again here. And then we of course got the 4 Underground Seas coming in here. I personally want to play all 4 Underground Seas. I want to be able to fetch them. I want to be able to get 3 Underground Seas if one of them gets wastelanded. And I just like the simplicity of playing this mana base. So this is the one that I rent with. I was only on 1 Undercity Sewers, Cavern of Souls, which I guess I'll place down here, and then we had Island and Swamp. So that was the mana base. 8 fetches, 4 duels, 1 Undercity Sewers, 2 basics, and a Cavern for your uncounterable Oracle. Rounding out the mana package, we have 3 copies of Lotus Petal, the 1 copy of Lion's Eye Diamond, the 4 Dark Rituals, and 2 Cabal Rituals. Those of you who have been kind of analyzing and watching the different deck lists come out weekly will notice that this is unfolding somewhere between some of Rwanda Pro's recent work, and then a Midlands list as well was the primary inspiration for what I played. But the idea here is that we get access to 4 dark rituals. That's just like obvious, of course. The 2 Cabal rituals help against prison strategies. They give you a way to cast your Doomsday through a Chalice of the Void on 1, for example. And they also let you play off basic island, basic swamp in a nice way against Blood Moon. In those kinds of matchups. So I like having the 2 Cabal rituals in addition to the 4 Dark rituals. Then some lists have been running 4 Lotus Petals in place of the Cabal rituals. I do still like how the Cabal ritual feels, and so I want to keep playing it, although I could see running 1 Cabal ritual and then 4 Lotus Petals as well. That was one thing that I was kind of a bit torn on when making my final choices. And then the LEDs a given. Lotus Petals, obviously great. So that kind of does it for the mana base here. And I'm just going to condense the mana a little bit. So we'll put just the lands in this pile. It's pretty straightforward. The mana base is pretty normal. We'll get our petals over here. And get some ritual action displayed down here. And then we're going to turn over here to our interaction suite, which is what I decided to register this weekend. I wanted 4 copies of Thoughtseize. I think Thoughtseize is the best discard spell. Obviously, it hits both problematic creatures and problematic spells, permanents, things like that. I know that sometimes you like to have a duress if your opponent has like an Orcish Bowmasters and you need to strip something from their hand and your life total is really low. You're going to see that we've got some duresses tucked over here in the sideboard. I like playing the straight up 4 Thoughtseize in the main deck because this also allows us to hit cards like Endurance or Orcish Bowmasters to take problematic creatures. So the first kind of foundational move here is to have 4 discard spells to begin our interaction suite. And then that's going to be rounded off with a single copy of Flusterstorm. This card I've really, really liked this weekend, and as well as more recently on Magic Online. I think Flusterstorm's a great Magic card. You can counter Veil of Summer when you're kind of poking in with a Thoughtseize against Omni. It wins counter wars, and it defends Doomsdays. And you can also bait out your opponent's Consign and then just fluster it as well. The number of dazes has always kind of been up in the air on Magic Online and results, and just even in my own testing. Trying out 4 dazes sometimes, moving down to 3, which I think is like the most common number. And then today we're on 2 dazes, 1 Flusterstorm. I just really value having Flusterstorm right now, and there's a lot of Ancient Tomb decks in the format where the dazes can kind of get outclassed rather quickly. And then, of course, we have 4 copies of Force of Will. So this means that we've got 4 discard spells and 7 counter spells in the main deck, and then we'll have more counter spells and whatnot coming in this sideboard to help round out in certain matchups. Moving on from the mana and the interaction, we can now take a look at the kind of cantrip Doomsday finding suite, or that portion of the list. Like a Midland and like at Eternal Weekend, I'm still only running 3 Ponders. I think this format's very fast. While I like Ponder, sometimes it just feels really bad to cast a Ponder on turn 1, which is quite something, because that was most certainly not always the case. But I've been actually really enjoying 3 Ponders personally, and I would like to continue playing 3 Ponders, but I would not ever fault anyone for wanting to play 4, as the Ponders do help you find interaction when you need interaction, find Doomsday when you need Doomsday, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, while I'm happy to play 3 Ponders, you will never once find me playing less than 4 copies of Brainstorm. Brainstorm's an exceptional card in the pile, and it's also just very good at filtering through your hand, changing resources around to get the exact thing that you need, protecting your Doomsdays and other important pieces from opposing discard, so on and so forth. I love me a Brainstorm. After that, we've got 3 copies of Personal Tutor to help us find the Doomsdays. Personal tutor is like honestly one of my least favorite cards in Personal tutor is one of my least favorite cards in Doomsday, but it kind of just feels necessary. You just can never bank on only having 4 copies of Doomsday. You need some way to get the Doomsdays, even if it's not the best way. This is the best way that we have, and it also pitches to Force of Will. So I think playing personal tutor is not really a bad idea in this format. And in lieu of the One Ring and other cards, we want personal tutor, but I don't always want to see a personal tutor. And so I do like running 3 currently. A lot of the lists seem to be running 3 instead of 4. And that has felt nice. You tend to see it every now and again, but not always see it. Because sometimes when you always see it, like if you've already got the Doomsday in hand, I mean, you can get like Edge of Autumn with it. You can get Thoughtseize or even Ponder with it, but it's often not really like it doesn't feel good is what I'm trying to say to do that. And so 3 personal tutors is where I landed for this tournament, or that's what I registered. Next up, we've got the main sake from the deck here. 4 copies of Doomsday. Obviously, you never want to leave home without 4 copies of Doomsday, especially if you're playing Doomsday. The deck just would not work without it. So we'll set those Doomsdays down here. And then just a few pile cards to round out the list. We've got 2 copies of Street Wraith, 2 copies of Edge of Autumn. Those are your cyclers. 1 copy of Deep Analysis. Honestly, Deep Analysis didn't even really come up for me at all over the weekend, and I don't know if we need it. That Deep Analysis could be Days number 3. It could be Personal Tutor number 4. It could be Flusterstorm number 2. It could be Ponder number 4. This could be maybe considered a flex slot. I don't know. We're running Spoils of the Vault in the deck. Obviously, Spoils of the Vault doesn't get you 2 cards, but there was a lot of times like sometimes the deep analysis is important. Sometimes there's like no way you can win unless you have this deep analysis. This came up at my locals the other night where I was playing against lands, and they had an Urza's Saga, 2 Urza's Saga tokens with the boots that gives it haste. And I basically doomsdayed down to 4 life, and I had like a Consider in hand, and the only way that I was able to win, given the mana that I had, because I had to I used like all of my resources. I think I drew Personal Tutor, and then I had to use my Cycler in hand to cycle the Personal Tutor into my hand, and then I had to Dark Ritual Doomsday, and then all I had left was 1 mana and a Consider after all of that, and then I could just consider the Deep Analysis into my graveyard, and that was that. I was able to win the game. But the Deep Analysis didn't come up that much over the course of the weekend. And then we've got 1 copy of Consider. Obviously, Consider is a very good Magic card. We don't really want to leave home without Consider. It helps us get through our piles. And then we've got a Spoils of the Vault right here, which I really like. It can find Doomsday, but I really like it in the pile purposes. We'll see that this Spoils came up for me a number of times over the weekend. Very importantly, one time, though it was unsuccessful. One of my Rakdos Painter opponents was playing Chains of Mephistopheles, and this was a way for me to get to my Oracle without needing to draw cards, which you can't do when there's a Chains out. And then, of course, 2 copies of Thassa's Oracle at the end of the line here. It looks like my computer motion here is kind of lagging out on me, so hopefully that's not too annoying and it will kind of catch up with itself. We kind of have things laid out now. And so yeah, this was the list that I played. 16 lands, a bunch of mana over here on the left, some interaction, protection in this quadrant up here. We've got our Doomsdays and our ways of finding the Doomsdays in this quadrant over here. And then we have a hodgepodge of pile cards set off to the side over here on the right. The sideboard that I registered for this event is as follows. We have a copy of Jace, Wielder of Mysteries, as an alternative win condition. This card, I can't remember actually if I won a game with Jace. I did win one game with Jace this weekend, which I'll talk about in a second. But I like having Jace in my deck. But I do have one spicy card in this sideboard that was amazing for me on the weekend and also in some of my testing. And I really want to continue experimenting with that as well. But we'll get to that in a second. So we got Jace Wielder of Mysteries, alternative win condition. We've got basic island, snow covered, that is. It doesn't really have to be snow covered. I just only have one beta island, and I also love this snow covered island art from Ice Age, and so I just do the 1/1 split. Let's see here. This island is really good because you can basically board it in and then have 3 basics in your deck, which allows you to cast cards like Barrowgoyf, the next card laid out here in our sideboard, off all basics. Gives us some extra outs against cards like White Orchid Phantom and also against Ghost Quarter. So I do really like having access to the extra basic land in the sideboard. Of course, also the applications with Blood Moon are nice. I didn't see any Blood Moons at this tournament, but whatever, right? Here we go. We got a basic island, and then we've got 4 copies of Barrowgoyf. Honestly, I'm actually wondering, so like Barrowgoyf is a card that, like, when it's good, it's really, really good. But if it doesn't work out, like if your opponent kind of anticipates you're bringing it in, you can kind of get screwed over by having a Barrowgoyf in your deck, right? Like, there's, I don't even know what to say about it. The Barrowgoyfs, sometimes they're just amazing. It feels like it's like they're the best thing ever. Like, I played against Grixis Delver, or sorry, Temur Delver at my locals the other night, and I just, like, I don't know, pivoted onto the Barrowgoyf plan, just resolved my Barrowgoyfs, and there was just felt like there was really nothing that they could do. And my opponent's like double lightning bolting my 4/5, and then I just have like another one in my hand that I scooped up from it. Like, I don't know. The only real way that they have to stop us is with like Murktide Regents, which is nearly impossible to race a Barrowgoyf. But then, right, like, you got to think like there's not many, like the Temur Delver decks are kind of been outranked by blue-black tempo, and blue-black tempo plays fatal push, and if your opponent's like heads up enough to leave a couple of pushes in their deck, maybe even to challenge an oracle with the intent of challenging an oracle on an imperfect pile, you can just get punished by having your Barrowgoyf just get killed, which happened to me against blue-black Delver this weekend. And so, well, I've had really good experience at my locals, like kind of crushing Mono Red Prison and crushing Temur Delver in some games by having this huge life linker. Yesterday, every time that I boarded in Barrowgoyf, I felt like I just got punished for doing so. Now, this could be in part like a failure on my end because I think I brought Barrowgoyf in a matchup where I shouldn't have, and we'll get to that soon enough. But yeah, sometimes like you just having these is kind of tantalizing, and I sometimes want to go on to the pivot because I might be tired or like there's too many things to worry about with the Doomsday pile, for example. But then they just don't pan out, and so actually Barrowgoyf's a card that I'm wondering if we can do without. Can we do without Barrowgoyf? Like, I'm actually wondering if we can just go back down to 2 Shieldreds. The Shieldreds are great against this mono blue painter deck that runs the rings. The Shieldreds seem really good against Omni-Tell, Show and Tell variants when they're trying to set up, and then the Shieldreds are still good against Delver and blue-black tempo as well. So that is something to keep in mind. Going down to 2 Barrowgoyf or to 2 Shieldreds again would basically let us get 2 more sideboard slots, which we could devote to other things. So we got the 4 Barrowgoyfs here, and then I wanted to up my discard, so I'm running the spicy cards hiding underneath this Duress. So I'm running 2 more copies of Duress. In the past, I've run more discard in the sideboard, but I think there's a lot more Veils running around in this format currently, and so I didn't really feel justified in bringing like 7 or even 8 or 9 discard spells. So like I had in other events and deck lists. So I'm down to the 6. I think 6 is still good. You get to board in the discard, but you don't like feel like that's the only thing that you have going on. Here's the card that I added that's spicy. I added 2 copies. I added 2 copies of Extirpate to my sideboard. I was talking about this in the last video, which went up yesterday or the day before, depending on when I get this edited. This extra bait card is freaking awesome. So why would we want to play extirpate over surgical extraction, given that this costs 1 mana? Well, if you see here, split second. As long as this spell is on the stack, players can't play spells or activate abilities that aren't mana abilities. Choose target card in a graveyard other than a basic land. Search its owner's graveyard, hand, and library for all cards with the same name, and remove them from the game. This is surgical extraction with split second. Why does split second matter? Well, sometimes, for example, against Blue-Black Reanimator, if you look at those lists now, they're playing like 3 copies of Brazen Borrower in the main deck, and they just don't really give a shit about Leyline of the Void anymore. They're so prepared to play against Leyline of the Void. You know what they're not prepared to beat, necessarily? An uncounterable way to just like take their trolls, take their Atraxa, take their animate, their Archon of Cruelty, forcing them to like put their reanimate spell on the stack and then just have them have nothing that they can do about it to get that card removed has been really, really nice at kind of like slowing that game down, the matchup against Blue-Black Reanimator, like kind of slowing the matchup down so that you don't feel like you need to race them. And then you can kind of get into this more like mid-rangey posture where you've like kind of fended off their early onslaught with an extirpate, then you've like poked their hand with some discard spells, and then you can set up a route to your Oracle via Doomsday. And I've kind of really liked the way that this card's played. Split second is also, I think, pretty damn nice against all of this Memory's Journey shenanigans floating around in the format. I haven't actually got to test it against Oops All spells, and I know that they've got Poxwalkers, which can kind of complicate things here. But I think that extirpate, you can like extirpate the Thassa's Oracle, and they can't respond by shuffling it into their deck to build their own Doomsday pile with Memory's Journey. And this works also against Cephalid Breakfast. So I do like its application there. And then I also had great success this weekend playing against Omni-Tell, like extirpating their stock ups, extirpating their show and tells to just kind of set them like back. Is really nice, especially when you're boarding in this like discard heavy package against combo, right? Like you can have 2 extirpates and 6 discard spells plus all of your counter magic, and then you can kind of counter or discard their namesake card and then extirpate it, which has felt pretty nice. This came up in a Doomsday Mirror as well as a Omni-Tell opponent that I played against. Okay, so extirpates are there. And then we've got, to round out the sideboard, 4 copies of Force of Negation and a second copy of Flusterstorm. I still like Force of Negation for countering Chalice of the Void. If you're against a Chalice of the Void opponent, you really need to have a way to stop that damn Chalice of the Void. I still think that Force of Negation is one of the better ways to do that. You answer that card on the stack. Don't worry about it on the battlefield. Let's just never let it resolve to begin with. And then the Flusterstorm, really, really, really like having 2 copies of Flusterstorms across the 75. This feels so good against some of these combo matchups like Omni-Tell. It's also really good against Reanimator and at defending your Doomsdays again and Oracles against Consigns and whatnot in the tempo matchups. So I really like having access to those Flusterstorms. So yeah, this is again the sideboard: Flusterstorm, Force of Negation, Chase Wielder of Mysteries, Island, Barrogoyfs, Duress, and Extirpate. Okay, so I'm just going to take some of these cards away now, and we're going to get into my tournament report. I don't honestly remember everything that happened. I was really tired, and I was there to play some Doomsday, and I was really looking forward to it. I had an absolute blast at this tournament, though things didn't go well. So yeah, I'll just do my best to recount what I remember. And I thought I would make this a video rather than a written up report. So yeah, what did my tournament look like at this 5K in Oakville at Enter the Battlefield, organized by Legacy of the North? My first round opponent was, well, it was a Doomsday mirror, which I thought was pretty funny. I think there might have only been two Doomsday decks in the entire tournament. There was 104 players registered, by the way. Like, Legacy is very much alive in Southern Ontario, and it feels bloody awesome. So yeah, we had 104 players. It was a 7-round tournament. Round one, I sit down against my opponent. I lost the die roll, which was to become a common theme across the weekend. And my opponent keeps their hand. I think I mulled to 6, and they lead on. I wonder if I can like remember what my hand was. Um, I had like, I think the cards that mattered were Street Wraith, Polluted Delta, and Force of Will. Okay, so my opponent leads on Flooded Strand, pass, and I untap, upkeep, draw. I play Polluted Delta as my land drop return, and I pass. And I forget what was all in my hand, but I know that I had a Force and a Street Wraith, but I didn't have a blue card for the Force of Will. And my opponent in end step fetches their Flooded Strand. They get Undercity Sewers. They put a Surveil trigger on the stack, and they tank for like quite a while. I initially was like, okay, we're probably playing against Reanimator, like right off the bat. Let's see how this goes. But then I can't remember if they kept the card on top. I think they did. They go to their next turn. They untap. They play another Underground Sea, and then they go Dark Ritual Doomsday after like reflecting for a while. And so I'm in a position where I'm like, okay, if they make the Cavern Pile, like I'm just dead. I don't think I had a way to Doomsday them back in response. So like we can try right now, right, to Polluted Delta, fetch for Undercity Sewers, check if there's a blue card on top. If there's not, bin it, and then cycle Street Wraith to hope to find the blue card to pitch to the Force on the Doomsday. But I didn't think that was very likely to work, and I know that my heuristic as a Doomsday player is if Doomsday resolves in game 1 especially, without a known matchup, usually you're pretty much in the clear. So my opponent put their Doomsday on the stack, and I immediately, just like without thinking, just said resolves. And I just like set my hand down and just like let them do their thing. And I was thinking like, okay, you've got another mana. Maybe in this spot, I just let it resolve really quickly. You just go for the LED pile. And so they spend some time making their Doomsday pile, and they set it down, and then I look over the discard pile or the exile pile, sorry, and sure enough, there's no LED, there's no consider. I was like, okay, we might actually be able to get there. And so my opponent just does the brainstorm, so on and so forth, down to the Oracle. Then when the Oracle was put on the stack and they had no cards in hand, I fetch my Polluted Delta, get Undercity Sewers, reveal the top, look at the top card of my deck. It's a Ponder. I leave it there. I cycle the Street Wraith. My opponent goes, oh no, into the Ponder. I exile the Ponder to the Force of Will and force the Oracle, and we are up 1 game. I don't exactly remember how I sideboarded, but I brought in Flusterstorms, Force of Negations, Jace Wielder of Mysteries, Duresses, and Extirpates. I thought the Extirpates could be good uncounterable ways of potentially messing up their pile by shuffling it, or if I can get a Duress off on a Doomsday, extirpating the Doomsday is like with this card not being able to be countered, it becomes, I think, way better than Surgical in that respect, because like if the card goes to the graveyard and you've got an extirpate, you know it's getting all of them. And if I could put my opponent onto like who knows, right, if they even boarded in any jukes. I think they had one Shieldred that they boarded in, but I just these were the cards that I took in. We played I opened a super heavy interactive. My strategy in the Doomsday Mirror is always just to try to be as slow and patient as possible, to not put Doomsday on the stack first. I find that at least in my experience, the one who tries to cast Doomsday first usually loses. And so I basically I think I kept a hand that had like 2 Force of Negations and a couple of blue cards, and I just like made my land drops and passed the turn, made my land drops and passed the turn. My opponent was like thought seizing me, and they were taking like brainstorms and ponders selection cards rather than some of my interactive spells, and I think this let me have my interaction left in my hand when they inevitably had to go for the Doomsday. But yeah, basically I end up with like 5 lands out, and I just like top deck this Jace Wielder of Mysteries like pretty late into the game. Might have been like turn 10 or something. I honestly don't remember. And I just like I like triple fetch 3 polluted deltas, go get 3 underground seas. And I think my opponent thought I was going for the Doomsday. And then I just put this Jace on the stack. They let the Jace resolve. And so now I'm tapped out and I've only got 1 mana up. Jace comes in. I like mill them. I then draw a card, and I chose to mill them instead of myself because, of course, we've got extirpates in our deck. So if I do just happen to mill a Doomsday, then like maybe draw an extirpate off the Jace, I can like fetch my additional land and hit them. But yeah, Jace comes in. I'm like fairly tapped down, and now my opponent decides to make the move. I think my hand when I played Jace was Force of Negation, Personal Tutor, Daze, and Dark Ritual. I played Jace, I milled them for 2, and I drew Doomsday. And I passed the turn with Force of Negation, Personal Tutor, Daze up, and my opponent went black, black, black. So they tapped 3 black mana. They put Doomsday on the stack. They knew that I had this Force of Negation. And so I force pitch Personal Tutor, exile their Doomsday, and they've got 3 cards left in their hand, and then they go Dark Ritual Doomsday. So they've got 2 Doomsdays. They set up a Doomsday into Dark Ritual Doomsday pile. But at this point, my opponent only has like a Lotus Petal and a land left, and they just have 1 card in hand, and I have Daze. They've already made their land drop for turn. And so I know that there's no way that they can put a Caverned Oracle onto the stack, and if their last card in hand is Cycler and they cycle down to Oracle, I think they knew about my Daze too. It just gets Daze because they just don't have enough mana left after all of that. And so my opponent, I think they had spoils in hand. They like passed the turn, and now I have a Jace out. I have a Jace out. They like make their Doomsday pile. They pass the turn with spoils in hand. I have a Jace out, and my hand is Dark Ritual Doomsday. I draw Brainstorm for turn. I go Dark Ritual Doomsday, Jace, mill myself to draw Thought Seize you, just to make sure there's nothing crazy they could have. I take their spoils of the vault with my Thoughtseize, and then I cast Brainstorm with 2 cards left in deck and a Jace Wielder of Mysteries on the battlefield. And so Jace got it done. Love Jace in these combo mirrors. Even in the face of Pyroblast too, I think like this card is just so sweet. Drawing 2 cards a turn when you've got like the kind of 7 counter magic spells, the 4 discard. Now you're going up to 6. And then you're adding another 5 counter magic spells to your deck. This card, drawing 2 cards a turn, can really help you make sure that you're never passing without protection up. So I was 2-1, 2-0 at the end of round 1. Looking to go to round 2. My round 2 opponent was playing Omni-Tell, blue-green. I think it was blue-green. It might have even been mono-blue. They had Dream Halts in their deck as well, which I thought was quite interesting. And so basically in round 2, game 1, I honestly don't really remember what happened. This round's pretty fuzzy to me. I think basically I like countered a bunch of things that they did, and then eventually put a Doomsday on the stack and won. I know I won this round in 2. And then I boarded the same way pretty much that I did against Doomsday in the last round, just bringing in all of this interaction. My opponent they like mulled Oh, I remember what happened. In game one, my opponent like mulled to 5 or 4. I think they mulled to 4 and just didn't find what they needed. They had a kind of very unlucky series of opening hands. They mulled to 4 and they just didn't have enough resources to keep up with my Doomsday. I made a Dark Ritual Doomsday past the turn pile with Cycler in hand to go down to a Caverned Oracle on the following turn. And they just didn't have enough resources to fight against all of the things that I had. In game two, I started like my opponent kept I think like a no lander with like 3 forces. And I just kept like a super interactive hand with like no intention of putting Doomsday on the stack anytime soon. I just started casting like Thought Seizes. They One of them got forced. I think one of them got dazed, and I think another Thought Seize got forced. So I knew that they were like protecting a show and tell in their hand, and they were just kind of waiting for the payoff for it. And so eventually I drew a duress. I duressed them. I then extirpated their show and tells, leaving them only with 2 copies of Dream Halls left in their deck. And so with the show and tells gone, it kind of slowed them down enough where I could set up a Dark Ritual Doomsday for the win. And so we started off the tournament 2-0. And then in round 3, I got paired against Rakdos Painter. The only black card that I personally saw was Chains of Mephistopheles out of the sideboard, but we'll get to that one in a second. The game one was wild. So I'm on the draw again. I'm just always on the draw. Like this would have been so different if I was on the play, but I'm on the draw. My opponent reveals a Gengantha companion, so I wasn't quite sure what that meant, but I often don't see Gengantha, whatever it's called, in play. But nonetheless, this opponent brought one to the table. They had one in play, and they're on the play, and they go Basic Mountain Pass. And my hand is very good. I mean, I have access to the turn 1 win. I think I have Dark Ritual Doomsday double cycler in hand, where you can go like, Dark Ritual Doomsday, cycle for LED, play LED, cycle hold priority, crack LED into consider, and then down to the Oracle. My opponent just plays this Pyroblast, and so I also have a force in my hand, and I'm just like, okay, they have their mountain out, they could have Pyroblast. Usually I would jam. Like I feel like recently I would jam, but I had been trying to be a little more cautious in my play. And so this time I was like, okay, I can make a pile because I have 2 cyclers in hand. I can make a pass the turn pile that cycles into a blue card like Brainstorm or Ponder to pitch to Force of Will. And then on the following turn, I can draw a second cycler and then cycle down to Cavern Oracle and win on turn 2. And to me, this felt like pretty safe. I mean, so I built that pile with Force on top. And then cycler, Cavern Oracle. There might have been one other card in the mix. I can't quite remember off the top of my head. But I passed the turn, having Doomsday. I'm at 9 life because I had to fetch. My opponent goes Bolt you to 6, and in my end step. And so I go to my end step, and then I'm at 6. And then my opponent untaps, and they just like really quickly just go Ancient Tomb, Ancient Tomb, Lotus Petal. They just like play both of them out. And I'm like, okay, now all of a sudden they have 4 mana, and then they tap their mountain and they put a Grindstone on the stack. So now they have a Grindstone activation. And I'm like, oh shoot, like I can't beat this Grindstone. And it was really good that my opponent played their Petal before they played the Grindstone, because if they played the Grindstone first, then the Petal after, I actually would have probably let the Grindstone resolve and countered the Lotus Petal, which means I would have won this game. So they have this Grindstone ominously on the stack with the ability to activate it in such a way that I probably lose to the Grindstone if they time it right. So in response to the Grindstone, I cycle my Street Wraith, I draw my blue card, and I pitch cast Force of Will. And now I'm at 3. I counter the Grindstone, and then my opponent goes, tap Lotus Petal for red, bolt you. and I die. And so that was like, I was like, oh my goodness, because here I thought I was like, I'm taking the slower route where I almost assuredly can't lose. And then they just they had bolts, grindstones, and just like everything they needed to kind of to beat me. And my opponent kind of just couldn't believe that they got away with it and was showing so much excitement at their ability to survive my Doomsday. And it turns out that if I had just gone for the turn one kill, they didn't have the Pyroblast, they had the friggin' bolt. And then they drew the second bolt, I guess, on their second turn. So the stars were just aligned. The gods were smiling down on my opponent there. I thought I was being cautious, making like the kind of a really great pile in this spot, and it just turns out that that I got absolutely dumpstered. But this is the way things go, right? So game two comes along, um, and I basically make a I can't remember. I remember just like winning with Doomsday on the same turn. My opponent leads on Ancient Tomb Disruptor Flute. That's right. And they named Doomsday, making my Doomsdays cost 6 mana. And I basically set up for a dark ritual into Doomsday. And so I cast the 6 mana Doomsday off 2 Dark Rituals and an additional land, had Double Cycler in hand, and this time instead of passing the turn, I was like, I'm just going for it. So I cycled into LED, and then LED cycle into Consider down to Oracle, and won the game through the Disruptor Flute, and my opponent was like, oh, I guess I should have named Thassa's Oracle, not Doomsday, and I'm not sure that that was 100% right. But nonetheless, we were going to game number 3, and here's where things start to get a bit dicey for me. I decided to bring in Barrogoyfs for game number 3, and in retrospect, this was an absolute mistake. I should have just remained on the bloody Doomsday plan and just tried to fight through their hate and interaction. But I thought maybe like it's been, they didn't see the Barrogoyfs in game 2, didn't see them in game 1, so maybe I can catch them off guard with a Barrogoyf. In game 2, I have a Dark Ritual Doomsday hand, but I also have a Barrogoyf, and my opponent leads on a Disruptor Flute, this time naming Thassa's Oracle. And I thought that I didn't have the means really to set up a way to cast the Oracle through the flute with like a Dark Ritual or something. Like I would have maybe had to pass the turn too many times. And if they have bolts in their deck, that seems problematic, right? And so I just lead on the turn 1 Barrogoyf off Dark Ritual, and my opponent's like, whoa, like wasn't prepared for that. And we get into this like long grindy game, but here's like the kicker, right? My opponent just plays like a painter servant naming Blue at a certain point. They have like an Agatha's Soul Cauldron pumping, or like a welder in the graveyard that they're like turning their painter servants into goblin welders. And it just became apparent to me that I die as soon as they find a grindstone. And these goyfs just like cannot get the job done and should not be brought in against Painter, no matter how miserable Painter makes it. So we were in this like weird kind of dogfight where I was getting through for like a little bit of damage there, but he was using his Agatha's Soul Cauldron to mitigate the power and toughness of my goyfs, all the while like enhancing his creatures. And I just started regretting the kind of like strategy that I took. I eventually play like a second Barrogoyf, which gets pyroblasted because it's blue from the painters. And then a Chains of Mephistopheles comes down. And I'm like, oh no, like this isn't good. Once the chains comes down, I like drew a bunch of cantrips in a row. I think I drew Deep Analysis, Consider, and Brainstorm were like my 3 consecutive draws after the Deep Analysis came down. But I had like a bunch of life from my Barrogoyfs. My opponent just was unable to find their grindstone, and so we were staring at each other for a while. And then eventually I get a Doomsday, and I have an LED. And so my plan was to basically go Dark Ritual Doomsday into Spoils of the Vault, crack LED to put to spoils through the chains all the way down to a Thassa's Oracle, then put the Thassa's Oracle on the stack for 5 mana using 2 lands, one of which was a Cavern, the other which was a LED. My opponent only has 1 card in hand, and so I set all of this up over the course of, I think it was like a pass the turn once pile. I just felt like I had to go for it because at any moment my opponent could just draw Grindstone and the game's over. And the last card in my opponent's hand was a Pyroblast, and because I had to play the Cavern before I discarded my hand to to LED in response to spoils, they kind of knew that the spoils was the last point at which they could interact with my combo, and so they pyroblasted my spoils of the vault, which was the last card in their hand, and then I was unable to cast my Thassa's Oracle. Because I couldn't get to it through chains. In retrospect, what I should have done was include a dark ritual in my pile, such that if I could get away with passing the turn like 3 times, I could just put a dark ritual oracle onto the stack. But I didn't do that. And this is like a good thing to remember with spoils. When you're making spoils, it's not always like piles with spoils. It's not always that you have like spoils on top or something, and then like, yeah, spoils on top, and then all of the like meaningful cards, the last meaningful card oracle on the bottom, and then you just have like blanks between them. The blanks are the X's between the spoils and the card that matters also fucking matter. And when you're, 3 rounds into a tournament, the tournament started an hour late, and you're kind of like tired and and just not feeling it. You haven't eaten lunch yet. Sometimes it's really easy just to be like, yeah, these 3 cards don't matter, so I'll just put some random stuff in them. And then it actually turned out that because I had so much life off the Barrowglyph, I might have actually been able just to naturally draw through my Doomsday pile into Dark Ritual Oracle, but I just didn't put the Oracle in, and I only had 4 mana sources and couldn't cast the Oracle naturally without the LED. And so that was a hindsight on my part. In hindsight, that was an error on my part. I kind of screwed that up. But what can you do, right? This is just how the cookie crumbles sometimes. And I like to think that if I went back, reflected more on that, I would have made a better pile there and potentially got to win. But my opponent did have the hooks in me with the Chains of Mephistopheles, the Disruptor Flute, and then a kind of flurry of red blasts. Makes it really challenging to beat that Rakdos Painter deck. But I think that what I should have done was not bring in the Barrowglyphs and just focused on being a little more Doomsday heavy. Try to sneak a win through that way. In any case, at this point, I was 2-1. And I was going on to round number 4. And in round number 4, I got paired against a blue-black tempo opponent. I ended up winning that one in 2. Game 1, I think I might have been on the play for the first time in the tournament, and I just went turn 1 Dark Ritual Doomsday. I had it in hand. I was like, yeah, I'm just gonna jam it. We'll see if it works. If it works, it works. If it doesn't work, I had like 2 Ponders left in my deck or in my hand, and then a couple of other things, another land or something like that. And so I was like, okay, if they counter my Doomsday with a Force of Will, it rebuild with these 2 Ponders essentially. And so I just jammed. And it resolved. It worked, and I built a pass the turn once pile that cycled down to a Caverned Oracle, I believe. And I think because I had a Cavern already in hand, so I'm not 100% about that. And then game 2, I don't remember. I do remember winning, but I don't remember if it was like a Barrowglyph win or not. I don't think it was. I honestly don't remember how game 2 went in this blue-black tempo matchup, but I remember that I won in 2. I just don't remember if it was via Barrowglyphs or via a Doomsday pile that discarded a consign. I'm really sorry about that. But I did beat the blue-black tempoed matchup in round number 4, and so I was 3-1. And then I got paired against a green-blue Omni deck, very similar to the list that Kai has been playing now that he's abandoned Doomsday in favor of Show and Tell and Omniscience. Kai's stocks went up while ours have remained the same. But yeah, so this guy was on. This guy's a really, really cool opponent. This is one of my favorite matches that I played all day. They were on, Omni. Game 1, what happened? Oh, game 1 was heartbreaking, and this is I can't even be sad for how insane my opponent's luck was in game 3 of this matchup because of how unlucky they were in game 1. But game 1, basically, I think we passed the turn a couple of times. I have a Dark Ritual Doomsday in my hand, But I was worried that it would get countered because we were kind of just staring at each other, and I wasn't able to check their hand because of Veil of Summers and whatnot. And my opponent sneaks and not with sneak attack, they just snuck a show and tell into play through my defenses and my best effort to stop it. I think we had a bit of a counter war. They uh, pitched an omniscience to a force of will. I forced back, or sorry, they forced back. And they were left with only one card left in their hand. And I thought, like, okay, it might just be like an Emrakul, like they might just have like the monster in their hand and they'll put the monster into play. Um, my hand remaining after the counter war was like Cabal Ritual, Doomsday, Cycler, Wraith, I think. And my opponent resolves. So I'm like, if it's an Emrakul, I think I just untap and win. It wasn't an Emrakul. They had a second Omniscience. And their last card was Lorien revealed. And so I was like, all right, Omniscience is in. Like, what's your last card? They go Lorien revealed, and then they just draw 3 cards, and they looked rather disappointed and kind of like said, oh, well, pass the turn. And I just thought, okay, I get a shot here, and I'm going to take my shot. And so I go Cabal Ritual Doomsday. In all likelihood, I thought it might get countered or that I'd have to throw my Street Wraiths in response to a counterspell to try to find something to stop what they had cooking. But it turns out that they just like immediately said, yeah, they're like, yeah, the Doomsday resolves. And I was like, okay, I feel like this opponent would have countered. Like they were like playing very well, and I was like, I feel like this opponent would have countered the Doomsday had they been given the chance. And so I just built the cycle into LED, cycle down to Oracle pile, and my opponent just showed me their hand of 3 lands. So their Omniscience into Lorien revealed, drew them up 3 lands, which is extraordinarily unlucky. And then I kind of stole the game from under them with my very, very powerful Doomsday rejoinder, you might say. In game 2, I boarded in all of the counter magic in the same way that I did against the previous opponents that I was describing that were playing combo throughout the day. So I boarded in my Fawns, my Flusterstorms, my Extirpates, my Duresses, and my Jace. And again, I just want to assume a controlling posture, then win with Doomsday at some point. We both had like heavily interactive hands, and we just like passed the turn a whole bunch of times. Like I'm talking, this game went to the point where they could like basically like hard cast an Omniscience. I think I was able to like thought seize them under a veil. I like took their stock up because they didn't have much else. Then I like thought seized them again, and I think I took their consign to memory. Then in their draw step, I like extirpated their stock ups, which they had like an extra one in their hand. So I kind of like got the double discard off the extirpate in their draw step, got rid of their value engines. And then eventually I got up to like 8 cards where I'd have to go to discard. And so I cast like a brainstorm to try to rearrange some of my cards, find some more interaction for an incoming onslaught. And then my opponent had way more interaction than I did, and they had Veil of Summers. And so my Flusterstorms and Force of Wills just weren't enough to cut through their show and tell with all their mana. And they got there with the Omniscience into an Atraxa, and I was like, okay, this game's over. And so yeah, that happened in game 2 after like it probably went like 10 turns. It was an insane matchup where we were kind of staring at each other, waiting for someone to flinch, and I flinched first and lost because of it, probably. And then for game 3, I was like, okay, I'm actually not sure that I can actually win with a Doomsday. When I extirpated them, I like looked at their deck. They didn't have Uro left in their deck. They had no way to answer a Barrogoyf, and they had just like most of their counter magic was like force of negations, fluster storms, might have been like a spell pierce in there, ways to interact with non-creature spells. And I was like, maybe I can just throw them off guard by bringing in my 4 Barrogoyfs. And so I squeezed in some Barrogoyfs. I think I might have even taken out a Doomsday or two. I bring the Barrogoyfs in, and I open this hand for game number 3 that I was like quite excited about. It was a turn 1 Thoughtseize. It had 2 lands, 2 Barrogoyfs, a Flusterstorm, and Force of Negation blue card. And I was like, okay, I think that's 7 land, Goyf, Flusterstorm. Or sorry, Thoughtseize, Force, blue card. Yeah, that's 7 cards. And I was like, okay, if I find a land, like this is so sweet. My opponent mulls to 5. And I'm on the play. It's game 3 because I lost game number 2. I lead on my Thoughtseize, target my opponent. They reveal a hand. Their mull to 5 is Ancient Tomb. It's Ancient Tomb, Lorien revealed, Brainstorm, Stock Up, and Cunning Ritual. Okay, so their only blue source is the Lorien revealed, and they have an Ancient Tomb. Then they've got 3 like ways to find things in Brainstorm, Cunning Ritual. Is that what it's called? Not Cunning Ritual, Cunning Tutor. Whatever the one is that lets you get something from your sideboard, and Stock Up. And I was like, I think they're on a mull to 5. I think I just have to take the Lorien revealed, cheese them off blue. If they miss on their land drop, they can't cast any of their spells. I'm like, I think that's a fine play. So I thought C's take the Lorien revealed, pass the turn. I've got Flusterstorm plus Force blue card. I'm feeling pretty good. I got a Barrogoyf. My opponent top decks Misty Rainforest, plays their Misty Rainforest, passes the turn. I draw. I don't remember what I draw. I play a land drop, my other fetch land. I pass back with 2 mana up, and my opponent, I think they just go to their turn. They untap, they play Ancient Tomb, and they just pass. And then in my end step, I fetch, I put an Undercity Sewers on the stack, I reveal like an Underground Sea on the top of my deck, I keep it there, I untap, upkeep, draw, and now I've got my 3rd land drop, I've got my 2 Barrogoyfs in my hand, and I still have a Flusterstorm, a Force, and a blue card. And I'm wondering, like, okay, I checked my opponent's hand 1 turn ago. My opponent basically didn't have much. So I was expecting my opponent to cast Stock Up on their next turn in order to like stock up into a show and tell. And so I was like, okay, I kind of want to resolve this Barrogoyf right now. Just get my beater down. We'll pass the turn now when I feel like their resources are limited. We'll get my beater down. So I tap out a Flusterstorm here. And this was I don't know if this was a good play or not. I put Barrogoyf on the stack, and my opponent like kind of was like, oh shit, right? Like, I'm not prepared to beat this Barrogoyf. And so I was feeling like pretty good. The Barrogoyf comes down, beater's on board. I wasn't going to cast a second Barrogoyf. I just felt like I need to get this beater down, and then I can worry about interacting with them later on. In my opponent's end step, they go fetch land, Brainstorm. They untap, upkeep, draw. And then they go second land drop of a colored variety. They go show and tell. I go force of negation, pitch, personal tutor, or whatever it was. They go fetch Veil of Summer. And now the show and tell resolves. I put my Barrogoyf in. They put Omniscience in off the show and tell. And then they cast the Cunning Ritual or whatever it is, the tutor, Cunning Tutor. Why do I not know what this card is? You know the one though. They get shared summons. They search for both of their big monsters. They put them into play, and I'm dead. Would you cast the Barrogoyf there, or do you just pass with Fawn plus Fluster Up? If I pass with Fawn plus Fluster Up, I get to fluster their Veil. Show and tell gets countered, and then I guess they just stock up into the combo again. So I really wanted to get my beater on the board. And so I did. I cast the Baraglyph, and then I lost because I cast the Baraglyph essentially. Um, but yes, so that there put me then to 3-2, and so I was then out of top 8 contention, and I was moving along to the final round for me. It was round 6. I played against Blue Black Delver. Game 1, I had a quick Dark Ritual Doomsday. I think my hand was like land, Dark Ritual, Doomsday. My opponent, I was on the draw, my opponent forces it. And then I Flusterstorm their Force of Will using the Lotus Petal. Doomsday resolves. I've got Cycler in hand. We do the Oracle, Cycler, Cavern, Oracle kind of dance with a pass the turn pile. And so we got there. I boarded in the Baraglyphs again. Game 2. I end up going for a Baraglyph line after like discarding my opponent's removal spell, and then my opponent ends up resolving their own Baraglyph. And I never really battled against Baraglyphs before in these kinds of mirror matches, but my opponent told me afterwards that they had actually cut Murktide Regents from their deck and were just playing Baraglyphs instead. And their Baraglyph's like way better than our Baraglyph, right? Like my Baraglyph only finds another Baraglyph. Their Baraglyph finds like Bowmasters, Netherglyphs, Delvers, all kinds of like shenanigans. And so he like basically chump attacks a trade. I take the trade because I don't want them to start overrunning me with all their creatures. I lose my Baraglyph. They find like a Bowmasters, and the game gets to like a really interesting spot where I can cast Doomsday, but the Doomsday puts me to 4. And my only way to crack into the pile was a Brainstorm, and I knew that they had a Bowmasters in their hand. And so I had to scoop because I had no way to beat Bowmasters plus the days that they had being at 4 life. If I had 1 more life or 1 more land, I think I could have got there with Spoils of the Vault or something. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I remember thinking about the possible piles for a while, like the Doomsday resolved, and I was trying to build a pile, and I was like, it was one of those where it just didn't seem like it was coming together. There was no way I could beat the 2 things that they had left. And so we were on to a game 3, and in the game 3, I just got absolutely like mowed over by an onslaught of creatures. I think we both had 2 Baraglyph hands, and we like thought seized each other's Baraglyphs. And then I just got lost, and I think, and then I just got overrun because they had the last Baraglyph standing, basically. And I think that, again, had I just not boarded in these Baraglyphs, or had I just taken these Baraglyphs out for game number 3, where my opponent then might be bringing more removal in, because I saw them reach for their sideboard, and they did make a couple of adjustments. But yeah, I just wasn't sure if I wanted to play with the Baraglyphs again or not. I left them in, but in retrospect, I think I was supposed to take them out and just become a Doomsday deck again, especially because they were now pivoting to beat the Baraglyphs. So that was a mistake on my part. So I ended up losing to Blue Black Delver in 3, and I ended up 3-3 at the end of the day. But throughout the day, like there were moments where things were feeling like really, really good and everything was coming together nicely. So I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow with the bans. I don't know what kind of version of Doomsday I'll be playing after the bans. But this was hopefully the last kind of run that I had with this deck this weekend. And let's hope that we get a nice new metagame on Monday and that we can start brewing again. I might try to experiment a bit with Bug. I like to go back to Esper every now and again as well, but I do like the way that this blue-black list is feeling, and I'm eager to see what kinds of changes I might want to make. I think Extirpate was a great card. That's really awesome. I think it's worth experimenting with further. And yeah. Thanks to everybody who has subscribed to the channel and has been supporting me along this journey. It's really, really cool. We've surpassed the 100 subscribers, the kind of goal that I was aiming for, and that's more than I thought I would get when I started this. I'm just doing this because I have a fun time and playing Magic Online, and it's kind of cool. Just I thought to record yourself while you're doing it and make that public with misgivings. So in any case, I hope that you're all doing well. We're gonna get back to some more Legacy Doomsday action on Magic Online, and then we're also going to be. I've got like a kind of backlog of some cube videos that I'll just be throwing out every now and again as well. But I wish you all the very best, and I hope to see you all again very soon for some more legacy action. Cheers, everybody.